we're now at this new frontier of, hang on, we need to think very strategically about how we cover disinformation.
So Claire, describe to me your view on a pathway to trusted journalism.
So it sounds like a cliche, but it's listening. It's actually responding to community needs. And I think fundamentally, the journalism industry has moved into the internet era in the sense that we use Facebook and Twitter to say, click our links, watch our broadcasts, but we haven't actually really understood what the internet was designed to do, which is real two-way communication. And just very quickly, as somebody who studies disinformation, those who are part of the disinformation ecosystem are partly there because they feel heard. They feel that they're part of something. They feel like they are sending tips of electoral fraud. They are sharing new research about vaccines. So when I compare that ecosystem to the journalism ecosystem, which is so important, I still see this very top-down, here's a piece that I spent a long time researching, I will send it out. I know there's comments, but I'm not really going to read them. I mean, journalism professors have been talking about this for some time now, but fundamentally, the moment we're in now is that people are being drawn towards conspiracy theories because they're looking for explanation. They're looking for a sense of agency. And I would argue in journalism, we have to be responding to community needs. We have to ensure that newsrooms reflect the communities we're covering. So some great work by Andrea Wenzel back in 2016 now, where she went and did focus groups with Black communities in LA and said, how do you feel about this journalism? Of course, every time they saw themselves represented, it was, crime, drugs, et cetera, et cetera. And they did some solutions journalism storytelling with the communities. And they're like, thank you. That's what my community feels like, and you haven't managed to capture that. So it's obvious as I say it, but it's about really listening, and it's about representing communities and being useful, like that age old, there's a hurricane coming, rather than talking about all the terrible things. It's like, here's where you can get blankets. Here's, that stuff that people are getting from next door. They're getting it from their Facebook groups. That kind of stuff, fundamentally, if we don't change that, yes, we can teach people the difference between opinion and news. Yes, we can stick labels on stuff. That's not going to really change the dynamics of trust. It's got to be about community-based listening.
So you've talked about two things there. One is data collection, and the second is solutions-based journalism, which are two growing concepts, and they are part of the pathway to trust in journalism in the future. Is there more in your mind?
Yeah, so I think you talked about data collection there as a kind of a way of listening to the community. But again, that feels extractive. Like journalists will say, yeah, I'm listening to the community. I'm on Twitter all day long. But what does it fundamentally mean to understand your community and understand their needs? What is it that they're confused by? Because they're going to the internet and finding those needs answered by other people right now. So I think it's less about data collection. It's fundamentally understanding the community, and not just what they're talking about, but what they are confused about and what they need. And the other thing is this piece about really being representative of your community, and also being honest. Like there's all these conversations right now in the US post Roe v. Wade with journalists saying, I had an abortion. I don't want to tell my editor because I'm worried they won't let me cover that story. So we need to get this balance right between, yes, objectivity, which is critical in this moment, but also like a part of a transparency around, this is who I am, this is my lived experience, this is why I'm the person to tell this story, as opposed to these outdated sense of like, oh, if you're from a Black community, you can't talk about police violence. It's so outdated, and fundamentally, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
What about something like some kind of an accreditation program for journalists, so that they have, similar to lawyers and accountants and a variety of other professions, so that they have a baseline of understanding of what journalism is beyond what they learn at university, and then ongoing professional development training points. What are your thoughts on that?
There is a requirement that journalists upskill continuously. I think the addition I'd make to your suggestion is all of that has to be made transparent to the audience.
I like a piece you wrote with Whitney Phillips, which mentioned light doesn't always disinfect. Picking up on the metaphor that journalism shine light in dark corners.
I do a lot of newsroom training, and this is the part that I really see the light bulbs go on, which is, the whole purpose of journalism is to shine more light, but that has been weaponized by bad actors who say, all right, I don't really have a very large audience, but if I can convince a newsroom, either maybe I can dupe them into running with false information. So after a mass shooting, we often see on 4chan, people trying to push the wrong name of the shooter. Like that's the ding, 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 ding. This is the winning ticket. But if you can't get journalists to do that, the second best thing is to get journalists to debunk or fact check these rumors, because the process of doing that is then giving oxygen to this pretty niche rumor that nobody would otherwise have heard about. And the goal is to get people to go, that's interesting. They go to Google and they use those keywords that you've just written into your debunk, and then that opens you up to this whole conspiratorial space. So journalists have become this vehicle used by disinformation agents saying, journalists love to shine a light. They love to expose what's happening.
Well as that, of course, clever politicians use that as well.
Absolutely. And so I talk about the trumpet of amplification, which is a lot of this stuff starts in closed networks or anonymous spaces, moves into conspiratorial spaces, then moves to Twitter or Facebook, which is often where journalists find it. But to your point, what do you do when the president is pushing this? That's not a decision about ignoring 4chan. That's the president. And that, of course, as we all know, over the last 3 years, has been such a challenge for news organizations. And there is not an easy answer to it.
So how do we fix that?
So I would argue that the coverage of Trump towards the end of his presidency looked very different from the beginning. And that was because there was a lot of hard conversations in newsrooms about the consequences of the kind of coverage they were doing. I did a research project last year looking at the amount of times MSNBC, Fox, and CNN had put Trump's tweets full screen. And there were 32 hours where his tweets were full screen, no labels, no flags, no nothing. So fundamentally, I would now argue that newsrooms would say, hang on, if we're going to do that, we need a labeling process like Facebook does. We need to be very careful about just trotting out or, letting a politician run live with a speech. We probably should have delays so that we can ensure that we are making clear when there are mistakes, I'm being nice, that need to be fact checked. So I think, again, the news media is having to catch up to now just recognize, and it's not just Trump, it's Bolsonaro, it's Duterte, it's a whole host of different politicians. We need, as in the journalism industry, a way of saying, how do we navigate this? Because simply saying reporting is enough is not. And I think I'd also say about extremists, there are a lot of conversations in newsrooms like, well, if I can get Steve Bannon on, I'm going to be the one to ask the right question, and I'm going to hold him to account, without realizing Steve Bannon's supporters were clipping that interview to take out all of the hard questions and just giving more oxygen to those ideas. I think there's now a recognition that it's very difficult to just ask the hard questions, and these extremists are playing the media in a really dangerous way. So I think in the same way as news organizations had to learn, how do we cover large oil companies, or how do we cover special interests? How do we cover a war when covering troop movements might put troops in debt? Like, none of these are new questions. And so I just think we're now at this new frontier of, hang on, we need to think very strategically about how we cover disinformation, because it has and can create real harm, and we become vehicles of that unwittingly unless we're much more savvy about the ways that we cover it.
Yeah, so the challenge is having publishers that are profitable and don't have to rely on clickbait, and the kind of journalism, the kind of considered journalism that you're talking about.
The most widely shared piece of content in Q1 in the US was a Chicago Tribune headline that says, healthy doctor dies after receiving the vaccine, CDC investigates. Now, the actual report was very well done, and of course showed that there probably wasn't a connection, et cetera, et cetera. But in an age of we need clicks, some very good headline writer would have been like, this is going to work. And it did, but it got shared by anti-vaxxers, and it became this huge traffic magnet. And again, that's the problem in an era where most people only see the image and the headline. How do you do responsible journalism where almost everything else you've done doesn't count? Like, was the headline responsible? And in most cases, the answer will be no, because that's what's driving traffic.
Yeah, no easy solutions, Claire. Claire Wardle, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.